right, good.
All right, so this afternoon we are joined by Representative Mandy Powers Norrell from District 44 up in Lancaster County. Thanks for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, well, we want to start by letting our members get to know you a little bit. So if you would, tell us a little bit about your personal and professional background and how that shapes your views on the importance of education in our state.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, I'm Mandy Powers Norrell. I'm from Lancaster, South Carolina. Lived there all my life, and my family goes back many generations in Lancaster. Both of my parents worked for Springs Mills, which we had in Lancaster for many years. It was the world's largest cotton mill. I was first in my family to go to college, and that almost didn't happen because my mom became disabled. My parents couldn't pay for it. So I paid for it myself by also working at the mill, at the bleachery where my dad had worked. And I learned so much there at the bleachery because people would come over to my station that I worked with, and they would say, you know, Mandy, you have an opportunity that we didn't have. You have an opportunity to go to college, and you need to make the most of that opportunity. And so I really took that to heart, and I did really well in college and got a scholarship to law school, and actually lived in Lancaster and commuted to law school and finished in 2.5 years. Was second in my graduating class and decided not to take a job at a large firm, but to come home and serve the people that helped raise me. And the sad thing is, you know, right after that, the mill closed, and I was the only bankruptcy lawyer in town. I started filing bankruptcies for the people that I used to work alongside, and that you know, it really grounds you in community. In Lancaster, at least the part that I represent, not a lot of people move in and not a lot of people move out, so we're very, very close. I went to public school and sent my children to the same public schools that I went to. And the way that the education that I got was phenomenal in Lancaster County Public Schools. Now, back then, we had, you know, per pupil funding was at an all-time high. Since then, it has dropped significantly. And I can tell the difference between the investment in my education that the state made versus the investment in my children's education that the state made with them going to the same schools that I went to. It's something that we really, really have to turn around, but there are so many people who got elected and signed Grover Norquist's no new tax pledge so that they swear to always lower taxes. And the biggest part of the budget is education. So if you're going to sign that Grover Norquist pledge, then you are going to hurt education ultimately. And that's something that I think a lot of people are very short-sighted. When they first run for office, he would send them that pledge. And I wasn't going to sign any pledge that anybody from out of state asked me to sign, promising to do things that involve situations that we weren't yet faced with and promising into the future. But so many people signed it that, you know, once Act 388 was enacted, then, you know, education in South Carolina was really bootstrapped. And that has been very frustrating for me as a product of public schools and as a parent of children in public schools.
Well, you brought up a topic that's near and dear to a lot of our members when it comes to funding, because we have members across the state. I mean, I love the phrase education has been bootstrapped by funding, especially in our more rural areas like Lancaster County. Even though the state has an obligation to provide an education of high quality to every student in the state. So you talked some about tax policy, but in your views, what steps does the General Assembly need to take to get us back to the kind of state level of support you were talking about from your childhood so that we have an equitable system?
Right. Well, the way that I've always viewed public education is it is the great equalizer. You know, it's the promise that no matter who you are or where you come from, you can achieve anything if you're willing to take advantage of the opportunities given to you. And that is a promise that we are not keeping as well to the current generation. And I'm on the tax policy committee, and one thing that just about everybody on that committee, Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, no matter where they come from, they seem to agree that Act 388 was a bad policy. I hate it when they say it had unintended consequences. I'm sure they weren't intended, but if they thought about them, they could have figured it out that this was going to happen. So maybe they weren't intended, but they were definitely foreseeable. But because it was done through a referendum, and referendums are generally always written to get that yes answer, especially when it's written in a way to say, hey, would you like your property taxes lowered? Everybody's going to say yes. If it were written to say, hey, would you like to hurt public education for the foreseeable future? Then they might not have said yes. But it would be very difficult to enact another referendum to get rid of Act 388 because it benefits a lot of people who have very high property values, especially folks along the coast. So we don't foresee being able to reverse that movement from back so long ago, but we can, do other things to fill in the gaps that that Act 388 has created in public education, and that's going to take a greater investment of other funds going forward into public education to make up that gap. I mean, it's a multi-million-dollar gap for a whole lot of districts right now.
Yeah, I mean, the base student cost hasn't been at state level funding since 2008.
Yeah. And we've defined our obligation as minimally adequate, or the courts have. And when you're not even funding the required level of base student costs, then by default, you're saying that you're not funding public education at what you've already determined to be the minimum. And that's unconscionable.
Yeah, agreed. And that's had a trickle effect, not only on our students, but on our teachers.
Yes.
And our state's in a teaching shortage crisis with thousands of teachers leaving the classroom, hundreds of vacancies in classrooms to start school years. As a member of the General Assembly, what do you view as the steps the state needs to take to better recruit and retain top teaching talent to our schools?
I think it is a multi-level approach. I've hear a lot of folks say, we need to pay them more. Absolutely, we need to pay teachers more. But it goes way beyond that, because the lack of pay is a reflection of a lack of respect. If you ask somebody what they value, you're going to know what they value if you look at their budget or you look at their checkbook. And a lack of pay shows a lack of value and a lack of respect. There are other aspects of value and respect that I think are also lacking in the way that the teaching profession is regarded. And when I ran for statewide office a few years ago, I talked to so many teachers who were just at the end of their rope because of this lack of respect that is not only reflected in pay, but reflected in the fact that they're not allowed to go to the bathroom, during the day. They're not allowed to eat their lunch in silence, in peace. They're always on duty the entire time that they're there, and they're not afforded, a basic level of privacy that anybody who is valued and respected in any profession would otherwise be afforded. That they're asked to use their own funds to buy supplies for their classrooms, and their own time to bake cupcakes for parties and buy the supplies for that. And no other profession is expected to dip into their own pockets to fund the necessities of the profession, to dip into their own time at home that would otherwise be with their families, to do things that are not in furtherance of their profession. This is different from grading papers. This is, being asked to do things that really don't have anything else to do with the profession. So I think all of that is wrapped up in a package of respect and value. And it's and pay is a part of that, but it's not the only part of that.
Well, that issue of time and respect, I can remember vividly you talking about that as a candidate for lieutenant governor, and you were kind of ahead of the curve. Because that then became the big issue in the House Education Reform Bill, or one of the big issues, and subsequently in the Senate bill. But the General Assembly has not reached agreement on a quote unquote education reform bill, so it's likely to be on the agenda again next year. If reelected, what do you view as the top priorities in any sort of education reform package?
I really want to get that that 30 minutes of uninterrupted time that cannot be scheduled by administration. I heard from so many teachers who say, you know, yeah, I might get a planning period, but then the administration tells me what I have to do with my planning period. I'm one of these people. Like when I was very scheduled running for statewide office, I insisted on 30 minutes. Just give me 30 minutes to get my head right. And not everybody needs that, but a lot of people need that. I mean, I definitely need it for just my personal sanity. And I cannot imagine being expected to be on for a full 8 hours and not even get time to go to the bathroom, time to have lunch by myself, time to just get my head straight and think about, you know, what the second half of the day is going to be like. To me, that's the thing I relate to the most personally, is the need for every single teacher to be able to have unscheduled time that they you know, have autonomy to determine how to use. I fought for that in the House version, and at first we lost, and then there was something, I think we put up a lot of other amendments, and the Republicans came to me and said, okay, we'll give you your 30 minutes if you can get these amendments pulled down. And we made that deal and got it through in the House version, and also had a provision in there that said, and administration can't require that the workday increase by 30 minutes to make up for that unscheduled 30 minutes. So to me, that would be very, very important. The other one is just as a parent, the end of course testing that counts like 25% of a student's grade, and that is so stressful for teachers and students. I really want to see so many of those eliminated, or at least the value of them lowered, so that teachers can focus on what they need to focus on in their classrooms. You know, I mean, it's so often teachers are judged by the performance of their students, which is completely unfair, because students bring with them so much to the classroom in terms of their situations at home, poverty, and you know, and if a kid is hungry, it's their ability to learn that day is going to be significantly impacted. And so a teacher should not be judged for a child's inability to perform at a certain level, when their home environment is going to determine that so much more than the ability of the teacher. So I think so. In a lot of classes, like my kids went to a school where there was high poverty, and they weren't able to get through as much material as the schools in areas where everybody seemed to be fairly affluent. And so if they can get through 100% of the material, but in other schools they can only get through 70% of the material, they should not be taking the exact same end of course exam and have that count as 25% of their grade. It's unfair to the teachers, and it's unfair to the students. So wrapped up in that is like two things, you know, teachers not being judged on the performance of their students, and then also students not being evaluated on the same scale, because, you know, with these end of course exams, because you're going to have different schools where you're able to get through more material than others.
Yeah, I personally witnessed a child crying taking an EOC because of that grade pressure. And I love that you brought up that point, because I think too often state leaders scapegoat the federal government on testing and say, well, the federal government requires the test. That's true, but we chose the 20% thing. That is not a federal requirement. So that's us. So that's a great point. So pivoting, one other topic I want to make sure we address is a topic related to your opponent back in the 2018 gubernatorial race. Governor McMaster made a lot of news in July related to schools. And one of the big reasons why was his decision to take $32 million in relief funds from the federal government and create SAFE grants, which are private school scholarships for about 5,000 students. That's tied up in the state Supreme Court, but the governor has said he wants to ask the General Assembly next year to create a permanent version of that program from recurring state dollars. So as a member of the House of Representatives, if the governor comes before you with that request, what's your position?
will fight that with everything I have in me. Private school vouchers are the reason that I got involved in politics in the first place, because the man running for states to be my state senator was a proponent of private school vouchers, and I did not want him to be my state senator for that reason. I looked for people to run against him, and nobody would do it. And then finally, I said, "Well, I'll do it," because he's not going to have a coronation, and he's going to know he was in a fight even if he beats me. And that's why I got into politics. I do not believe that public funds that are intended for education, to me that is public school education, should ever be given to private schools that cater to the wealthy, and or to parents to send their children to private schools that cater to the wealthy. And that's kind of the intended workaround for a lot of people. But also, when McMaster did that, my response was, nobody should be surprised, because he campaigned on that. That was very clear throughout his campaign that he intended to enact policies that diverted public funds intended for education to private schools that cater to the wealthy. So when he got those CARES Act funds and had the discretion to use them, it was absolutely no surprise to me that he would divert them to private schools. And those funds should definitely be sent to public schools, because we need them. We need them desperately in our public schools. Maybe we can talk about giving money to private schools once public schools are fully funded, but we are so far away from that right now that it will be a long time before we can have that discussion.
Well, we are anxiously awaiting the state Supreme Court's ruling, and we hope that if he loses, the governor will put those funds to public schools instead of just sitting on them and sending them back to Washington.
I agree.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground on education policy, but I want to make sure our members know everything about you that you want them to know. So is there anything we haven't covered that they need to know before November?
I can't think of anything else. I think we've covered a lot. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Well, absolutely. And thank you for sharing with our members, and we wish you all the best this fall.
Thank you so much.
All right.